There's a particular feeling that comes over you when the first frost settles in and you walk into your root cellar and it's full, not from a grocery run, full because of what you grew, harvested, and put away. That feeling is what the Provident Acre is all about. Today, we're covering 10 vegetables that can genuinely feed a family all winter. Calorie-dense staples, nutritional workhorses, and a few overlooked crops that punch well above their weight. We learned these the hard way, through spoiled onions, missing potatoes, and a lot of humbling seasons. This is what actually works. Let's get into it. Vegetable number 1, potatoes. If there is one vegetable that has carried families through hard winters for centuries, it is the potato. And I don't say that lightly. Think about what the potato has meant to civilizations across the globe, from the Andes highlands where it originated, to the cottages of rural Ireland, to the root cellars of early American settlers. This is a food that has sustained entire peoples through long, cold months. On our homestead, potatoes are the backbone of our winter food supply. A single healthy plant can produce anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds of potatoes. And if you have even a modest garden plot, say a 10 by 20 foot bed dedicated to potatoes, you can realistically harvest 150 to 200 pounds in a season. That's meaningful food for a family. But here's something I learned the hard way. Not all potato varieties store the same. The first year we grew potatoes seriously, we planted a beautiful mix of colorful fingerlings and red-skinned varieties. They tasted wonderful fresh, but by November, about a third of them had softened. We lost them to moisture and early rot. What we learned is that for long-term winter storage, you want russet types and late-season starchy varieties. These have thicker skins, lower moisture content, and they hold up remarkably well in proper storage conditions. Our go-to varieties now are Yukon Gold for their balance of flavor and storage quality, and Kennebec for long-term keeping. How to store them properly. After harvest, potatoes need to go through a process called curing. This is something a lot of first-time growers skip, and it makes an enormous difference. You want to lay your harvested potatoes out in a dark, humid space, around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 2 weeks. This toughens the skin and heals any small cuts or scrapes from the digging process. After curing, move them to your cool, dark storage space, ideally between 35 and 40 degrees. A root cellar is perfect. A cool basement corner works. Even an insulated garage in moderate climates can do the job. Keep them in breathable containers, wooden crates, burlap sacks, cardboard boxes with holes, never plastic bags. They need airflow. Done right, potatoes stored this way will keep 5 to 8 months easily. We've pulled firm, perfect potatoes out in late March and early April. One last thing, check on them periodically through winter. Pull out any that show soft spots, because one bad potato really can spoil the whole bin. It only takes a few minutes every couple of weeks, and it's well worth doing. Vegetable number 2, winter squash. If potatoes are the workhorse of the winter garden, winter squash is the one that feeds your soul. There is something deeply satisfying about pulling a butternut or a Hubbard squash out of the cellar in February, months after it was harvested, cutting it open and finding that rich orange flesh still vibrant and sweet. It feels almost impossible, but that's the magic of winter squash. Unlike summer squash, which you pick small and eat quickly, winter squash is harvested when fully mature, with a hardened skin that acts like a natural seal. This is what gives it that remarkable shelf life. We grow several varieties on our place, and each one has earned its spot. Butternut squash is probably our most versatile. The flesh is sweet and smooth, it roasts beautifully, it purees into soups, and it stores reliably for 4 to 6 months in right conditions. Hubbard squash is the one older homesteaders swear by, and once you store one through a full winter, you'll understand why. These can be enormous. We've grown some past 20 pounds, and their storage life borders on remarkable. Properly kept, a blue Hubbard can last 6 months or more. Delicata squash is one my kids actually reach for willingly, which in a homesteading family is high praise. It has a thinner skin that you can eat, a sweet chestnut-like flavor, and it keeps about 3 months. How to store them. The key to winter squash storage is to harvest before frost, when the skin is fully hardened and the vine end has begun to dry and brown. Then, like potatoes, you cure them. 2 weeks at around 80 degrees and moderate humidity. This hardens the skin further and seals any nicks from harvest. After curing, move them to a cool, dark space, around 50 to 55 degrees. This is actually a bit warmer than ideal potato storage, which is worth noting if you're planning your root cellar layout. Squash don't like the same conditions as potatoes. Too cold and they'll get soft and watery. Too warm and they ripen too fast. A single plant will typically give you 3 to 6 squash depending on variety. If you have the garden space, even a dozen plants along a fence line can put up an impressive winter supply. I'll tell you, there is something genuinely comforting knowing that tucked away in a cool corner of your home is a row of beautiful squash that cost you almost nothing beyond a packet of seeds and some elbow grease. Vegetable number 3, onions. Onions are one of those vegetables that the modern grocery store has made so cheap and convenient that we sometimes forget how genuinely essential they are. In the pre-refrigeration homestead kitchen, onions were irreplaceable. They added flavor to almost everything. They stored without any processing or canning, and they provided a level of culinary variety in the winter months that was hard to get from anything else in the root cellar. They still are exactly that valuable, and we grow them in quantity every single year. We plant both yellow storage onions, our main crop, and a smaller patch of red onions for variety. The yellow storage types are what you want for serious long-term keeping. Varieties like Copra, Patterson, and Yellow Rock have been developed specifically for their staying power, and they will reward you with a harvest that lasts well into spring. One thing that surprised us when we first started growing onions at scale, the timing of harvest matters enormously. You want to wait until about 60 to 70% of the tops have fallen over on their own. This signals that the plant is done putting energy into the bulb. Then you bend the remaining tops down deliberately, wait another week, and harvest. Do not rush this. An onion pulled too early has higher moisture content and will rot in storage much faster. How to store them. Curing onions is just as important as curing potatoes, maybe more so. We spread them out on screens or old window frames in a shaded, well-ventilated area for 2 to 4 weeks. The skins need to become papery and fully dry. The necks, where the top meets the bulb, should feel completely dried and narrow before you bring them in. Once cured, we store ours in mesh bags hung from the ceiling of our cool entryway and in braids hung in the barn. Good airflow is essential. Onions need to breathe, and they cannot tolerate moisture. Stored properly, a good storage variety onion will keep 6 to 8 months. We're still been reaching for firm, flavorful onions in late spring. And there is something quietly wonderful about cooking through winter with onions you grew yourself. Every soup, every stew, every skillet of roasted vegetables, they all carry that small piece of your summer garden. Vegetable number 4, sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes might be one of the most underrated vegetables on the homestead. People sometimes think of them as a specialty crop, something you see at Thanksgiving, but don't think about as a staple. But the reality is that sweet potatoes are one of the most nutritionally dense vegetables you can grow and store. They are loaded with vitamin A, vitamin C, potassium, and complex carbohydrates. In terms of nutrition per square foot of garden space, they are genuinely exceptional. They're also, once you learn to grow them, surprisingly productive and forgiving. We started growing sweet potatoes about 4 years into our homesteading journey. I'll be honest, the first year, I wasn't sure what to expect. They grow differently from regular potatoes. You start them from slips, which are small sprouts rooted from a seed sweet potato, and they need warm soil and a decent growing season. But the harvest that first fall was a revelation. We dug out beautiful rose gold and cream-colored tubers from a relatively small bed, and when we counted up what we had, it was well over 80 pounds from a 4 by 20 foot row. How to store them. Sweet potatoes require curing too, but at higher temperatures than white potatoes. You want 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity for about 10 days. This converts some of the starch to sugar. It's part of why freshly dug sweet potatoes taste so much better than fresh ones from the store, and it heals the skin beautifully. After curing, they store best between 55 and 60 degrees. Wrap each one individually in newspaper or pack them in a crate with dry sand or wood shavings. Keep them in a dark place. Check them monthly. Done right, sweet potatoes will keep 4 to 6 months. And unlike a lot of root vegetables that taste flat and starchy by February, sweet potatoes seem to get sweeter in storage as the starch continues converting to sugar. For a family that loves roasted vegetables, sweet potato soup, or even just a split-baked sweet potato with butter by the fire on a cold evening, this crop earns its place every year. These next 3 vegetables are the ones that bring nutrition, variety, and color to the winter table, things that root vegetables alone simply cannot provide. Vegetable number 5, kale. I want to say something about kale that might surprise you. Kale doesn't just survive winter, it improves in winter. After a hard frost, the starches in kale convert to sugars, the bitterness mellows, the leaves become sweeter, more tender, and honestly, far more pleasant to eat than anything you'd pull out of a summer garden. This is one of the remarkable gifts that cold, hardy greens offer the winter homestead. When everything else in the garden is long gone and the root cellar is what you're working from, a row of kale under a cold frame or a thick layer of straw mulch can give you genuinely fresh, nutritious leafy greens well into winter, sometimes straight through it depending on your climate. We grow several varieties, but for cold hardiness, our family has landed firmly on lacinato kale, sometimes called dinosaur kale or Tuscan kale, and red Russian kale. Both will stand in the garden through temperatures well below freezing, especially with some protection. The way we manage our kale for winter is simple. We start it in mid-summer, about 8 weeks before our first expected frost, and get it well established before cold arrives. By the time November comes, we have large, mature plants that are essentially winter-ready. We put a cold frame over one section, mulch heavily around another, and leave a row unprotected to see what survives outright. In most years, even the unprotected row persists into December. You can also harvest kale in the fall and store it short-term in the refrigerator, or dry it into chips, or blend it into a powder for smoothies and soups all winter. But honestly, the best way to eat winter kale is just to walk out to the garden and cut it fresh. There is a particular pleasure in that. If you have children who are skeptical of kale, try it after a frost. The sweeter, milder flavor often wins over kids who would refuse it in summer. That was the case with our youngest. How to grow and store it. Kale is one of the most forgiving crops you can put in a garden, and for winter purposes, timing is everything. You want to start kale in mid-summer, about 10 to 12 weeks before your first expected frost. This gives the plants time to mature fully before cold arrives, because a small, immature kale plant won't survive a hard winter the way a large, established one will. Direct sow or transplant seedlings into well-amended soil. Kale appreciates compost-rich ground and consistent moisture while it's establishing. Once it's up and growing, it becomes remarkably self-sufficient. Space plants about 18 inches apart. They get bigger than most people expect. The other thing worth knowing, kale is a cut-and-come-again crop. You harvest the outer lower leaves and the plant keeps producing from the center. This means one planting can feed your family fresh greens for weeks, sometimes months, rather than a single harvest event. For winter production specifically, we plant 2 sections. One goes under a cold frame or low tunnel. This extends harvestable greens well into December and even January in our climate. The other section we leave fully exposed, mulched at the base with straw, to see what the plants carry through on their own. Lacinato and red Russian varieties consistently impress us with what they'll survive. Here's the honest truth about kale storage. The best storage is leaving it in the ground. A mature kale plant in the garden, protected by a cold frame or heavy mulch, is storing itself. the cold is actually doing you a favor, converting starches to sugars, improving flavor with every frost. This is your freshest, most nutritious option, and it costs you nothing beyond some straw or a simple cold frame. For short-term indoor storage, freshly cut kale wrapped loosely in a damp cloth or paper towel and kept in the refrigerator will hold for 1 to 2 weeks. Keep it unwashed until use. For longer preservation, kale dehydrates beautifully. Dry the leaves at low heat until crisp, then crumble and store in glass jars. Dried kale powder or flakes can be added to soups, stews, and smoothies all winter, and a jar of it takes up almost no space. You can also blanch and freeze kale in portions. Blanch for 2 minutes, cool in ice water, squeeze out excess moisture, and freeze flat in bags. Frozen kale holds its nutrition well and is ready to go directly into cooked dishes from frozen. For most families, a combination of all three, garden cold frame, fresh in the refrigerator, and a batch or two frozen, covers winter greens needs comfortably. Vegetable number 6, carrots. Carrots are one of those vegetables that homesteaders quickly learn to grow in large quantities because the uses are nearly endless and the keeping quality is excellent. A properly stored carrot harvested in October can still be firm, sweet, and nutritious in February. That's a 4-month shelf life from a vegetable that requires very little skill to grow once you understand a few basics about soil prep. For winter storage, the main thing to know about carrots is that they want cool and moist conditions, unlike most of the root cellar vegetables we've talked about, which prefer cool and dry. Carrots stored in open air will shrivel and go limp within weeks, but pack them in damp sand or sawdust in a cool space, and they will stay crisp and flavorful for months. We use large plastic bins with tight-fitting lids, the kind you might use for storage under a bed, filled with slightly damp sand. We layer the carrots in without letting them touch each other, cover them with another layer of sand, and keep the bins in our root cellar. We check them every few weeks and occasionally mist the sand if it feels dry. It's a simple system and it works beautifully. One thing we've learned about variety selection: Danvers and Chantenay types tend to store better than the long, slender varieties bred for fresh market. Their shape and density hold up better through long storage. In terms of how many to grow, this really depends on how much your family uses carrots. We aim for enough to make a big batch of carrot soup or a roasting pan of carrots every week from harvest through March. For us, that's meant growing a 4 by 20 foot bed of carrots, which gives us somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds. We also freeze a portion of our carrot harvest, blanched and cut, which extends our supply even further. How to grow and store it. Carrots are a crop that rewards good soil preparation more than almost anything else you can grow. They need loose, deep, rock-free soil to develop properly. If your ground is heavy clay or full of stones, carrots will fork, stunt, and grow into odd shapes that are frustrating to harvest and store. The fix is simple. Either work your bed deeply and amend heavily with compost and coarse sand, or grow carrots in a raised bed where you control the soil entirely. Since switching our main carrot bed to a deep raised bed filled with a sandy loam mix, our harvests have been dramatically more consistent. For winter storage, sow carrots in late spring to early summer so they mature and fall. Carrots that develop in cooling autumn temperatures are noticeably sweeter and more flavorful than those grown in summer heat. We do 2 plantings, an early spring planting for fresh summer eating and a main summer planting specifically for the root cellar. Sow seeds directly. Carrots don't transplant well. Thin them to about 3 inches apart once the seedlings are established. Crowded carrots stay small. Keep the bed consistently moist until germination, which can take 1 to 3 weeks. Patience here matters. Carrot seeds are slow starters. Harvest before the ground freezes hard. You'll know carrots are ready when the shoulders, the top of the root at soil level, are at least a ½ inch across for standard varieties. For storage types like Danvers and Chantenay, you want them fully sized.
Carrots want cool and moist, and this is the single most important thing to get right. Unlike most of your root cellar crops, carrots will shrivel and go rubbery within weeks. They need humidity to stay firm and crisp. Our method? Large plastic storage bins with lids filled with slightly damp sand or sawdust.
We layer the carrots in without letting them touch each other. Contact between carrots accelerates rot. Cover with more sand and seal the lid. We keep these bins in the root cellar at around 32 to 38 degrees. Check the bins every 3 to 4 weeks. If the sand feels dry, mist it lightly. Pull out any carrots that have begun to soften because they will affect their neighbors. Done correctly, this method keeps carrots firm, sweet, and fresh tasting well into March. We've done side-by-side comparisons with carrots from this sand storage against store-bought February carrots, and there is genuinely no comparison. Ours taste like they were just pulled from the ground. If you don't have root cellar space, blanching and freezing works well for cooked applications, soups, stews, and roasted dishes. Freeze in portions you'll actually use. Vegetable number 7, rutabaga. Now I want to spend a moment on a vegetable that I think deserves far more credit than it typically gets. Rutabaga. I know, some of you just made a face, and I understand because I made that same face for years. When we first committed to eating more intentionally from our garden through winter, rutabaga kept coming up in every old homesteading book and traditional farm guide we read. It was clearly a vegetable that sustained generations of families through hard winters, and yet we'd never really cooked with it. So we tried it, and our first attempt, just cubed and boiled, was, I'll admit, not a triumph. It was earthy and a little sharp, and nobody at the table was excited. But then a neighbor, an older woman who'd been gardening her whole life, showed us how she cooked them, roasted in butter with a drizzle of maple syrup, mashed with potato and cream, added to a winter stew where they soaked up the broth and became almost silky. That changed everything. Rutabaga is a cross between turnip and cabbage, and it has a depth and sweetness, especially after frost or long storage, that makes it genuinely useful in the winter kitchen. It's also highly nutritious, with good amounts of vitamin C, potassium, and fiber. How to grow and store it. Rutabaga is a cool season crop. It grows best when it matures in cool weather, so you plant it in mid-summer and let it size up as temperatures drop. The cold makes it sweeter, just like kale. For storage, rutabaga is one of the easiest root vegetables to keep. It tolerates a range of conditions and doesn't require careful curing that potatoes and squash do. Simply cut off the tops, keep them cool and slightly moist, and they'll last 3 to 5 months without much fuss. Some people wax their rutabagas for storage, dipping them in paraffin wax to seal in moisture, and this can extend their shelf life significantly. It's an old technique worth knowing. If you have a family that is willing to learn a few new recipes, rutabaga is one of the most rewarding vegetables you can add to your winter pantry. It costs almost nothing to grow, and it fills a genuine role that no other vegetable quite matches. These final 3 vegetables are the ones that often get overlooked in conversations about winter food storage, but on the working homestead, they earn their keep every single year. Vegetable number 8, garlic. If there's a single crop that earns its place on the homestead more completely than any other, in terms of ease of growing, storage life, culinary value, and the sheer satisfaction of harvesting it, garlic might be it. You plant garlic in fall. You do very little over winter. In late spring, you pull out beautiful, papery bulbs that will last you the better part of a year. On our homestead, we plant garlic every October, just ahead of the first hard freeze. We break apart bulbs saved from the previous year's harvest, tuck individual cloves into prepared beds about 2 inches deep and 6 inches apart, and cover the bed with several inches of straw mulch. That's essentially it. The following June or July, when about a third of the lower leaves have browned, we pull the garlic, brush off the dirt, and hang it in bundles to cure in our barn for 3 to 4 weeks. After curing, the skins are papery dry and the bulbs are tight and firm. Stored in a cool, dry, well-ventilated space, properly cured hardneck garlic will keep 6 to 10 months. Softneck varieties, the kind you typically see braided, can keep even longer. We have never once run out of garlic before the next harvest comes in. And given how much garlic we use in soups, in roasted vegetables, in fermented foods, in everything, that's saying something. Garlic is also a vegetable where saving your own seed stock makes an enormous difference over time. Each year, you save your best, largest bulbs for replanting. Over the years, those bulbs adapt to your specific soil and climate. Our garlic today is noticeably larger and more vigorous than what we started with, because we've been selecting for our homestead conditions for years. This is one of those aspects of homesteading that connects you to something much older and much larger than yourself. Every fall planting, you're doing something that farmers have done for thousands of years. How to grow and store it. Garlic is planted in fall, typically 4 to 6 weeks before your ground freezes hard. And this timing is part of what makes it such a natural fit for the homestead calendar. After the summer harvest rush is over and the garden is winding down, you plant garlic. It overwinters under the soil, puts out roots and sometimes small green shoots before the ground freezes, and then resumes growth vigorously in early spring. By June or July, you're harvesting. Break apart your seed bulbs just before planting, not weeks ahead, and select the largest, healthiest cloves for replanting. Larger cloves produce larger bulbs. The small cloves from the center of the bulb are fine to eat but make poor seed stock. Plant cloves pointed end up, 2 inches deep and about 6 inches apart. Cover the bed with 3 to 4 inches of straw mulch after planting. This insulates the soil, retains moisture, and suppresses early spring weeds before you're back in the garden regularly. In spring, you'll notice scapes forming, the curling flower stalks that hardneck varieties send up. Snap or cut these off when they form one full curl. This redirects the plant's energy back into the bulb and results in noticeably larger heads at harvest. Scapes are delicious, by the way. Sauté them in butter, chop them into eggs, or blend them into a pesto. Harvest when roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of the lower leaves have browned. Each leaf corresponds to a wrapper around the bulb, so you want enough green leaves remaining to give you a few good protective layers on the cured bulb. Curing is the essential step between harvest and storage, and it cannot be rushed. Lay harvested garlic out in a single layer on screens or hang in loose bundles in a shaded, dry, well-ventilated space for 3 to 4 weeks. A barn, covered porch, or shaded greenhouse works well. The goal is to dry the outer skins completely papery and dry out the neck fully. A moist neck will rot in storage. After curing, brush off any loose dirt, do not wash. Trim the roots close to the base and cut the stalks to about 1 inch above the bulb, or leave them longer for braiding if you're growing softneck varieties. Cured garlic in mesh bags, open baskets, or braids in a cool, dry, dark space with good air circulation. The ideal temperature is around 55 to 60 degrees. Avoid the refrigerator. The cold humidity can encourage sprouting. Properly cured hardneck garlic stores 6 to 10 months. Softneck varieties, the standard braiding types, can push towards a full year in ideal conditions. And always, always set aside your best bulbs for replanting before you use any of your harvest. Your future harvests depend on it. Vegetable number 9, dry beans. Dry beans might be the most undervalued crop on the American homestead today, and I think it's because we've lost touch with how central they once were. For most of human history, beans were a cornerstone of family nutrition through lean seasons. They're calorie-dense, protein-rich, and they store dried for years, not months, years. On our homestead, we grow several varieties of dry beans specifically for winter food.
Jacob's cattle beans, calypso beans, and a beautiful cranberry bean that has become a family favorite for winter soups. Growing dry beans is straightforward. You plant after your last frost, let them grow through summer, and simply wait until the pods are completely dry and papery on the plant before harvesting. On a dry, sunny fall day, you pull the plants, let them finish drying in an airy barn or porch, and then thresh them by hand or by putting the pods in a pillowcase and tumbling them in the dryer on air-only setting. The beans fall free, you spread them on a screen and blow gently across them or use a fan to separate the chaff and clean the beans in glass jars in a cool, dark place. A half-pound of bean seeds can yield 8 to 12 pounds of dry beans at harvest. For a family that eats beans once or twice a week through winter, in soups, in baked bean dishes, simmered with winter vegetables, a modest planting can cover a significant portion of your winter protein. My grandmother always kept a pot of beans on the back of the wood stove in winter, slow simmered with an onion, some garlic, a bay leaf, and whatever scraps of pork or smoked meat were on hand. That pot of beans could stretch to feed unexpected guests, could become 3 different meals across a week, and it kept the kitchen warm and smelling wonderful all day. That's the kind of food that dry beans represent on the homestead: humble, reliable, deeply nourishing. How to grow and store it. Dry beans are one of the simplest crops on the homestead once you understand their basic needs. They want warm soil, full sun, and relatively little else. They fix their own nitrogen from the air, so they don't need a heavily fertilized bed. In fact, too much nitrogen pushes lush leaf growth at the expense of pod production. Plant after your last frost date when soil temperatures have reached at least 60 degrees. Bean seeds sown in cold soil rot rather than germinate. Direct sow 1 to 2 inches deep, about 4 to 6 inches apart in rows. They don't need or want transplanting. For dry beans specifically, you grow them exactly like you would pole or bush beans. The difference is simply in when you harvest. Instead of picking pods young and tender for fresh eating, you leave them on the plant through the entire growing season until the pods are completely dry, tan, and papery. You can hear the beans rattling inside the pods when you shake the plants. The tricky part is timing the final harvest around weather. You want the pods fully dry, but if a wet fall is coming, you may need to pull the plants before a stretch of damp weather causes mold on the pods. On a dry, sunny day, pull the entire plants by the roots and hang them in a dry, airy space, a barn or covered porch, to finish drying for another 2 to 3 weeks. Threshing is the process of getting the beans out of the pods. For small batches, shell by hand. It's meditative work, good for doing by the fire. For larger quantities, put dried plants into a clean pillowcase, tie it closed, and beat it against a hard surface, or tumble it in the dryer on air-only setting. The beans fall free, you spread them on a screen and blow gently across them, or use a fan to separate the chaff and clean the beans in glass jars in a cool, dark place. Dry beans are one of the simplest long-term storage crops you will ever work with. Once fully dried and cleaned, they go into glass jars with tight-fitting lids, master jars are ideal, and stored in a cool, dark, dry location. At room temperature in a sealed jar, dry beans will remain nutritious and perfectly usable for 2 to 3 years. In cooler storage, they keep even longer. The one caveat: very old beans, beyond 3 to 4 years, become harder to rehydrate fully and take significantly longer to cook. Still edible, but the quality drops. For optimal long-term storage, some homesteaders add an oxygen absorber to each jar before sealing. This eliminates the small amount of residual oxygen that can slowly degrade quality over time. It's a simple step that's well worth doing if you're putting beans away for more than a year. Label every jar with the variety and harvest year. When you go to use them in late winter, you'll be glad you did. A note on soaking: always soak dry beans overnight before cooking. This reduces cooking time significantly and improves digestibility. Drain and rinse after soaking. Don't cook in the soaking water.
Vegetable number 10, dried peppers. Our 10th vegetable is one that might surprise you, but stay with me because it fills a role that nothing else on this list quite does. Dried peppers. Whether you grow sweet paprika peppers, mild ancho-type peppers, or your preferred heat level, peppers that are grown for drying are one of the most space-efficient, long-storing crops you can put into your garden. A single productive pepper plant can give you dozens of fruits. You pick them when ripe, string them on thread or thin wire through the stem, and hang them in a dry, well-ventilated space. Within 3 to 4 weeks, they're fully dried. At that point, they can be crushed into flakes, ground into powder, left whole for adding to soups and stews, or stored in glass jars where they will remain flavorful for 1 to 2 years. Think about what dried peppers actually do for a winter kitchen. They add heat, depth, sweetness, color, and complexity to dishes that could otherwise taste flat and monotonous. When you're working from root vegetables, beans, and stored grains for months at a time, having a jar of your own homegrown paprika or a bundle of dried chilies is not a small thing. For us, the peppers we dry most consistently are ancho poblano types for mild, complex flavor, a sweet paprika variety we grow specifically to dry and grind, and a cayenne type for heat when we want it. The paprika especially has become something our family is genuinely proud of. We grind it fresh just before use, and the difference between homegrown, freshly ground paprika and the faded powder in a store-bought tin is, I don't exaggerate, remarkable. Peppers need a long growing season, so in northern climates, you'll want to start them indoors 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. But once they're going, they are productive, relatively low maintenance, and they give you something genuinely special at harvest. How to grow and store it. Peppers need a long, warm growing season, which means in most climates they need a head start indoors. Start pepper seeds 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, sometimes longer for thicker walled varieties. They germinate best with bottom heat. A seedling heat mat makes a noticeable difference, as pepper seeds want soil temperatures around 80 degrees to germinate reliably. Without heat, germination is slow and uneven. Grow seedlings under good light. A sunny south-facing window works, or a simple grow light setup. Peppers that get leggy and weak indoors never quite recover their full potential once transplanted. Transplant outside only after nighttime temperatures are consistently above 55 degrees. Peppers are frost sensitive and will sulk or die if set out too early. When they do go out, harden them off gradually over a week, giving them increasing time in outdoor conditions before leaving them out permanently. For drying varieties, your focus is on letting the fruit fully ripen to its final color on the plant before harvest. Most drying peppers turn red, burgundy, or deep orange at full maturity. This is when the flavor is most developed, the heat most concentrated, and the flesh driest, all qualities that matter for drying. Good variety choices for drying include ancho poblano types for mild, complex, smoky flavor, guajillo for a slightly fruity heat, cayenne for straightforward heat, and sweet paprika varieties like Alma paprika or Luchauer paprika if you want to grind your own spice powder. Peppers are productive plants. Even a handful of plants, 6 to 10, can yield a generous quantity of drying peppers for a family's winter cooking. The traditional method, and still one of the best, is string drying. Thread a needle with strong thread or thin twine, pass it through the stem of each pepper, and hang the strung peppers in a dry, warm, well-ventilated space out of direct, strong sunlight. A covered porch, kitchen rafter, or dry barn works well. Within 3 to 4 weeks, the peppers will be fully dried, leathery, light, and slightly brittle. An indoor alternative is using a dehydrator set to around 125 to 135 degrees. This speeds the process to 8 to 12 hours and is particularly useful in humid climates where air drying is unreliable. Once fully dried, store peppers in sealed glass jars in a cool, dark space. Whole dried peppers keep their flavor well for 1 to 2 years. Ground spice, paprika, chili powder, cayenne flakes, is best used within a year as the volatile oils that carry flavor dissipate more quickly once the pepper is ground. For homegrown paprika, dry your paprika peppers completely, remove the stems and seeds, and blend in a spice grinder or high-speed blender until you have a fine, vivid powder.
Store in a small sealed jar away from light. The difference between this and store-bought paprika is something you have to taste to believe. It's brighter, deeper, and genuinely fragrant in a way commercial paprika rarely is. A small investment of garden space in spring pays off every time you reach for a jar of your own dried peppers on a cold January evening. 10 vegetables, all of them within reach of any family with a patch of garden and a willingness to learn. Potatoes and sweet potatoes for calorie density and staying power, winter squash for nutrition and comfort, onions and garlic for flavor and longevity, kale for fresh nutrition through the cold months, carrots and rutabaga for the root cellar staples, dry beans for protein and sustenance, and dried peppers to keep your winter cooking from ever feeling dull. This is how families fed themselves for generations, not from one perfect crop, but from a thoughtful combination of vegetables, each one earning its place at the table. If you're just getting started on this journey, please don't feel like you need to do all 10 at once. Pick 2 or 3 that feel manageable this season. Learn them well. Add more the following year. That's how a real, lasting homestead food supply gets built, one season at a time, one lesson at a time. We have more videos here on the channel walking through exactly how to grow, harvest, and store many of these vegetables in much more detail. If this was helpful to you today, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the Provident Acre so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you, genuinely. This community means a great deal to us, and we're glad you're here. Take care of your family, tend your land, and we'll see you in the next one.